Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Late Night Happy Hour. Brian Kamenetzky and Andy Kamenetzky. Very excited to be joined tonight. He's not only the host and really, are you the only guy there, right? Four in blue and gold.
That's me.
You are four in blue and gold.
I am.
He's the host and the staff.
Right. He's the help. He's everything. He is also the chattiest member of the Laker Film Room podcast, as we learned tonight as soon as we noted that he'd be on, of course, with Pete Zayas and Mike Trudell. Darius Soriano. Yay.
I'm applauding you guys.
What? And you're applauding you.
Thank you for having me on.
We're glad to have you on, man. We always love having you here. What has been so far, before we break down everything going on with the Lakers, the NBA, what's been the hazing process like for Mike Trudell as the new guy? Like, what are you guys putting him through?
So me and Pete are the good veterans, right? So we're not the guys who have filled Mike's car with popcorn or cut his mic out accidentally, right? So Mike, I'm going to speak kindly of Mr. Lakers reporter, Mike Trudell. He is a friend of the show.
Yeah, he's a co-host.
Yes. So we have not initiated Mike beyond some friendly ribbing before and after we start recording. And of course, in our group text thread, that is the LFR text thread. He gets plenty of heat there.
I think you do haze him because, and I think how you do it is by trying to get him to get really angry about how, and this will come up a little bit later in the show, people like James Harden play basketball. Like you push him to, because you know the button, we all know the buttons that we can press to make Mike Trudell upset. And so I think that's what you guys do.
Also, do not bring up load management with Mike. He is not a fan of load management.
We worked on air with Mike for years. So, I mean, we know all of these different things. Like, we know all the pressure points. Like, if you want to send Mike off on a rant, like, we know how to do this.
So
like, we practically invented it.
So, there have been a couple of Giannis MVP discussions that have come up on the pod. And he's graced us with his opinion on that a couple of times, both prompted and unprompted. So we love Mike, though.
Oh, he's the best. Yeah. We love Trudell. He's awesome.
That's what makes it fun to kind of poke at him, because it's easy. Is a very, very honest and true sense of like honor and right and wrong. And when these things aren't followed, he doesn't like it. We don't have that. Andy and I particularly, we just don't have that moral code. And it makes it easier to mess with people who do. So we have a lot to cover tonight, including a potential return of a Lakers legend to LA, and whether or not this is a good idea or not. I want to get through a few teams in the Western Conference and just sort of see, like, is there really anything that could go wrong for the Lakers this year that doesn't involve just bad things happening to them? And you, Darius, on the most recent episode, most recent version, whatever it is, of the Laker Film Room podcast, made a couple really good points about James Harden and what's going on with superstars that we want to get into. But before that, we need to talk about this, because if you follow Darius on any form of social media, it's like great basketball stuff, but like every 78th Twitter post is food porn.
Yes.
And we happen to get one of those tonight, and I believe I'm sharing it now. This looks delicious.
Yes.
Please explain what it is and how I can make it.
So I did not make this. I did not make this. I wish I could take credit for this, but I could not. I supported a local business, which I'm hoping, if people have the means to do so, wherever you are, support your local restaurants. They are struggling right now. And if you have the means and the ability every once in a while to get some takeout, and even I can't cook every night. I plan to make some pasta. I scrapped that. And I told my wife, I'm going to order us some ramen. So I ordered us some ramen, and I got this from a local ramen shop right up here in Oakland on Telegraph Ave.
I do love that you're supporting local businesses, and I do have to admit, though, I'm slightly disappointed in the story.
Oh, believe me.
Results of that.
This is one of those things that, by the way, like reveals the importance of checking in with the guest ahead of time, making
most
sure
of the time,
your research
making his own food. I'm not wrong about that.
No, you're not at all.
Am I correct, Darius? Most of the time, it's you taking a picture of what you just made. Am I right?
Most of the time, whenever I post something, it is something that I cooked.
Darius is legit. I'm just saying, like, you want to make sure, like, before you put him on the spot like this and basically pull back the curtain and, reveal the wizard, in this type of thing that ends up more underwhelming, just check, like, hey, buddy, did you make this?
Did you make that?
It was fantastic, though. So one of these days, I will try to make some ramen, but you know what? I'm the type of person that if I'm going to cook something, I really want to do it right. And so I'd want to like make the broth and all of that. And good ramen, it's going to take some time.
That's a lot.
My daughter is really, really into animes. Like she's watching like 6 or 7 and she's always telling me about all of them. And I can't keep all these characters straight. And I mix them all up and it really frustrates her. But because she's so into anime, she's really now just into everything Japanese culture. So we made ramen one time here. Like we didn't make the broth from scratch, but we made pretty much everything else. And it is labor intensive just in the sense that there's like a zillion different ingredients, but it's not hard necessarily, like especially if you're not making the broth from scratch. And it's really good. And it's satisfying because you did some stuff to make it happen.
That's one of the reasons why I enjoy cooking.
Yeah.
I'm a process person. If you follow me and you follow my writing or how I talk about basketball, that's my approach to life a lot of times as well. So I am a process type person. So it's one of the reasons why I do enjoy to cook, because I enjoy the process of actually putting something together and then at the end reaping the benefits of something that you did yourself, right? So
cooking's fantastic. Brian likes to cook too.
I do. Actually, okay. So I did find another picture of something that I think Darius made. So I think it says Darius. Okay. So I found another picture of Darius's food. Did you?
God, I hope he made this. I really hope he made this.
I'm going to lie. Even if I didn't, I'm just going to lie.
Did you make this?
I wish you would have showed the picture of the last food item that you shared from the last
time.
I
was scrolling through. Oh, that one again. Yeah. Did you make this? No. Did you make these Big Macs, Darius?
Unfortunately, I did not.
Darius, did you bring back the McRib single-handedly? Are you making them all? Was this your power?
It's the power of the crock pot. That's a slow cooker.
I think I rescued that adequately. All right. So like I said, a lot of things we want to talk about, but the Lakers. What I love about this season and what I loved about last season was that there was a tremendous amount of news that happened throughout the season, but very little of it was generated kind of by the Lakers. It was just stuff that happened either around them or to them. It was a very drama-free year. We were entering this season.
Yes.
Very little drama, a lot of contentedness. And it means to some degree, a lot of the storylines are mostly just like, I wonder how player X is going to play with player Y. And it's a lot of wait and see. One of the interesting things that popped up today is the potential return of Pau Gasol. The idea that Pau might want to come back. He expressed an interest in coming back to play and finishing his career with his brother Mark. Obviously, everyone in LA loves Pau.
Yes.
Is this a good idea? Like, I love Pau. Pau's my favorite human being that I've ever covered in sports. Is this a good idea, Darius?
So I'm going to break out my yes and no very early in this version.
The patented yes and no.
The patented yes and no. So I'll start with the yes part. Yeah. So everyone loves Pau, right? And reuniting him with his brother to play for the Lakers. He could slap on that number 16 again. I think everyone, just from a nostalgia and from a feel-good standpoint, like that's just great. I do also think the Lakers could use an additional big man, like an insurance type of big man, though. The Lakers lost some size during the offseason. They essentially replaced 2 7-footers with one when Dwight and JaVale was traded. Dwight went to Philly, and now Marc Gasol is here. And then the other center is obviously Anthony Davis, and then you've got Montrezl Harrell, who I'm interested to see what role he actually plays with the Lakers, whether or not he plays predominantly a lot of center the way that he did with the Clippers, or if they move him around a little bit more and slot him next to AD or even next to Gasol in the majority of his minutes. Another big guy would be helpful, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Big guys can get hurt.
I'm with you so far.
Right? They can basically just have insurance. AD gets nicked up or Marc Gasol gets nicked up. You need, someone gets in foul trouble. You need another big body. All of these things are great. So, sure, let's get another big guy.
That was the yes part.
That was the yes part.
That wasn't the question. The question wasn't, is it a good idea to go get a big guy?
So signing Powell specifically gets trickier. From my understanding, wherever he goes, he would want to play.
Yeah.
And I think that whoever the Lakers were to bring in, if they targeted a big man, there would be 0 minutes available on a nightly basis for that player. And that he would be, break glass in case of emergency, big man. And I do not think that's the role that Powell wants. I do not think that would be doing him any service on this specific team. And bringing him back as sort of this token big man or some victory cigar type of player, that's not the role I would want personally for, if not a franchise legend, a former icon star player who contributed to multiple championships. Like, I would just want something better for him. It was one thing when it was Meta or Ron Artest, and he was sort of on board with that role and the transition into mentor for younger guys and someone who got some minutes every now and then. The sense that I've gotten from what's circulating around Powell is that that's not necessarily the case with him at this point. And so the last thing I would want is to bring him in under the guise that he might have a different role, only when I already know the role that's available is not the one that he's looking for.
Andy, what's Spanish for bait and switch?
Yeah, I could ask my wife. She's fluent. When I think about this, I'm seeing right now on the chat, Donald Stonecipher is asking which team would actually give him significant minutes. My guess is not many, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is what he would want from the Lakers. And more than anything in this scenario with Powell, if he would somehow end up back in the NBA, I don't want to see him have a disappointing experience with the Lakers. If he has a disappointing experience with any of the other 29 teams in the league, that would suck. I wouldn't like to see that either. But that's different than him coming back and potentially closing his career with this team and have it being disappointed. And I don't think he would have any illusions about what his role would be explained to him. I can't imagine that they would tell him that it's going to be bigger than it actually is. But you still can convince yourself that it could be okay, or that it's with the Lakers. I wouldn't do this with anybody else, but it's these guys. And then you do it, and it doesn't sit right after a month or after 2 months. And I just don't want to see that with Powell.
I don't want him in the Mitch Richmond role when Mitch Richmond was on the Lakers, right? Where Mitch Richmond won a
final basket. I was going to say, unless he gets literally the final basket of a championship game. Remember when they clinched against the Nets, he got the last basket, which was really awesome.
But even then, right, he was a bit player who saw literally no time, and the idea of him was much better than the actual what he was in actuality, right? And Powell deserves better than that. So to me, ideally, what would happen for a player like Pau, be it with the Lakers or with any other organization, is that you get closer to February or the buyout market. Maybe there's an injury or two around the league, or someone gets COVID, or something happens, right, where there is suddenly a role for him, very similar to what happened to Carmelo Anthony with the Blazers. Now, I'm not saying Pau would slide into like a starting role for a playoff caliber team, but somewhere where he could come on board, be valued, be a contributor, and end his career on terms that he would want to end his career on, right? And maybe that would be with the Lakers, or maybe it would be somewhere else, but I'd like to see him get that chance if that's what he's actually looking for.
Let's see, like, you kind of got into, Darius, my big issue here with the idea of it. You mentioned COVID, and I mean, I think the Lakers, I don't think, are set up, broadly speaking, to be more injury prone than most teams. I think they actually, they've got some dudes who are pretty reliable. They got a couple guys who you worry about a little bit. I mean, Anthony Davis himself said, part of the reason I signed the extension is I do get hurt sometimes. I wish he hadn't said that out loud and put that in the world, but he did. And so, but you talk about COVID. This is a season where, all 17 dudes who, that you might have, at your disposal, from the two guys on the two-way, the 15, if you use all 15, may need to play. And Pau is 40 years old. He effectively hasn't played in 2 years, and was on the decline when he was playing. And I don't know. I think you need a better player, to be perfectly honest. Again, we all love Pau. That's not the issue. I think they need a better player. And I'd be worried you get into a situation where two guys get COVID and, somebody else is hurt, and all of a sudden this sort of ceremonial guy that you have around for practice needs to play, and they have to cut him because they need a body.
Well, it's tricky too. The Lakers are up against a hard cap.
Right.
And they haven't signed a 15th player for a reason. It's because they actually can't afford it at this point. They don't have the space under the salary cap or under the hard cap in order to sign a 15th player at this particular point. They're going to need to wait until later in the season when, as the season progresses, the veteran minimum prorates down, right? This is CBA nerd stuff, but it matters within the context of what the Lakers can actually do from a signing standpoint. And so any ability to sign Pau basically went out the door when Quinn Cook was signed. Now,
assuming they keep him.
Assuming they
non-guaranteed, yes.
Right, but basically when they rostered Quinn Cook, at least in this intermediary period, they no longer have the tools at this particular point to say we're going to bring in another player. So we will see what happens later in the season, but I don't envision anything happening in the next 2 weeks before the season starts.
Right. And it's a little bit of a microcosm of the big question that the Lakers have been answering anyway, which is just, and it happens in sports and in everything. And, obviously in bands, like, is it good to get the band back together? Like, do you always want to get the band back together? Clearly it doesn't work in bands, because that's where the expression came from. You can't get the band back together. It's not a great idea in sports, and these things always sound romantic and wonderful at the time. There's got to be a better way to honor Pau and like bring him in or have him be. The upside doesn't match the downside for me. The downside risk.
Well, I mean, look, the upside is it's Pau Gasol. You have Pau Gasol on this team with Marc Gasol. Hopefully they win a championship, and Pau is there to be a part of it, especially, with everything, beyond everything Pau means to this organization, everything that he's been doing for Kobe's family this year.
Yeah.
And the way he's been there for Vanessa and the three girls. And I mean, he's been a fixture at the Bryant household. And I mean, may we all have friends as great as Pau has been to Kobe and Kobe's family. Like, I mean, he's going to go into the Hall of Fame of Friends. Like, forget.
I mean, none of this is a referendum on power.
No. Of course.
And
not.
I mean, if it was anybody, if it was somebody who wasn't as beloved as a person as Powell, we wouldn't even be entertaining.
No, of course. I mean, I don't think anybody would even take it that way. I'm just saying, when you were talking about the potential upside, that's the upside, is that Powell is there, and you want him there on several counts for this moment. Like in this particular moment in time, you want Pau Gasol there. But practically speaking, there are a lot of potential issues with it. And like I said earlier, not the least of which is I don't want to see this experience, for a variety of reasons, not end up what Pau wants. Because, I mean, even he may be able to romanticize it in his head, being told, look, man, your role is likely to be very limited. You can still find a way to talk yourself into this being something that it's not. And I just don't want to see that for somebody like him.
Yeah. My only thing is that if everyone goes into it with clear eyes and everyone understands and everything was going to go perfectly, I'd love to have Pau Gasol back. A, because he's Pau. B, because like I said before, I do think that an extra big body would and likely will be helpful.
Daman Rangula, I will send Quinn Cook an Uber Premium to any airport of his choice.
Premium too.
Space for Pau. Premium.
Nice, right?
Yes.
That lets you know he's
Daman's stacked. He's got the cash.
That is true. It actually was more of a flex than a joke.
It really was. I
don't know about that. I mean, this could be a real sacrifice for him. I'm not sure.
Ramen's on him next time.
That's true. Right. That's true.
I mean, as long as we're doing this.
Except Postmates.
I mean, Anthony Irwin thinks you look like shit.
Hey, me and LeBron got gray in our beard, so
yeah, me as well. Man.
Anthony chimes in just to insult you. It's been a minute, but Darius the Gray is something to behold.
It is. I think it's worthy. Personally,
I was just going to say, glass houses and stones. That's all. That's right. So yeah, okay. So this doesn't seem like something that's going to happen anytime soon. But it is a fun thing to talk about, and it gets to so many of the things that we love about sports, and we love about the people that we cover, the people that we cheer for, and like Andy said, sort of the romanticism of it. Before we get to the Harden stuff, which is fascinating, I was asked a question. I did Spectrum earlier this week, and was asked a question about other teams in the Pacific, that might threaten the Lakers. And fundamentally, I have trouble getting past the idea that if everything goes, there's a scenario in which we're arguing at the end of the year if the Lakers have both of the two best players in the NBA.
Sure.
And that, from an analysis standpoint, makes it hard to get past who's going to beat them. Like, we can't all be Pete and break down film and all these other things. Like, we don't need to. They have the two best players in basketball. When you look around the rest of the West, Darius, do you see teams that, whether it's just how they might match up with the Lakers or whatever might be, that give them a real threat? I mean, is it just the Clippers? Are there others when you start to go down the conference?
I mean, the Clippers are obviously a really good team. We all love, well, I'll speak for myself. I love to get a joke off every now and then at the Clippers' expense. And there are times where they make it easy for us.
You should have been here Friday
to get those jokes off
with Daman.
Oh,
he went on like a 7-minute soliloquy.
Was he roasting?
Oh my God. Yeah.
It was like when you go to like the Comedy Store and they're like, you got a tight five? And like, yeah, except it was all Clippers slander. Like that was his tight five.
He picked out Paul George from the crowd, huh? It started.
Pretty much.
What's your name, buddy?
Where are you from? Palmdale? Oh, okay. I bet you hang out with people from Riverside too.
Yeah. The Clippers. So look, the Clippers are a really good team. I think that I liked the Ibaka signing. I think Lou is going to be a really good head coach for them. And whatever we think about Paul George and for all the reporting around the locker room stuff, it's still a talent league. Kawhi Leonard is still an excellent player. Paul George is as much as shots off the side of the backboard give me a chuckle. It's still a very good player.
It's hard to hit the side of the backboard. It's very, very narrow.
It's like throwing darts, right? So
exactly.
He's really good, though.
So
he's still a really good player.
So they're a really good team. Outside of them, it's, to me, a bunch of teams who are a piece or two away. And, you know, I was saying this, I said this on the last LFR pod, and I was on the Dunked On pod earlier today, but the Lakers won the championship last year. They have a head start on the rest of the league in terms of where they're starting. They are now a more talented team than they were last year. And so to me, their head start has only increased. And we will see how this plays out during the course of the season. But they are rightfully looked at as the favorites. We are all right to be optimistic about them and project them to be the favorites to repeat as as champions. And until other teams actually show and prove that they have upped their game a level or two in order to reach that true challenger to contender status, then look, like, I don't see it. Now, maybe a month in, Luka Doncic really does look like the second coming of LeBron James, and Porzingis is healthy and he's shooting 45% from three, and, you know, other offseason additions that they've made, they really coalesce, and this is like, oh my goodness, this team is on.
There's a lot going on.
But it's going to take a lot for teams to catch up to where the Lakers are right now. And that's no knock on where teams are. It's the fact that the Lakers look really good right now, coming off of a championship season and with the upgrades that they've made to their roster. Like, I know this sounds like me being a homer, but I don't know what to say about that.
I don't consider myself a homer, and I don't have a different answer either. So,
I mean, this is why you were saying that the drama, though, is like, this is not your typical Lakers season. You guys have been covering the Lakers for how long now?
2005, 2006.
Your beard wasn't gray.
That's
right. I mean, you were in the mix too, by the way.
And this is what I'm saying is drama has been a part of the ethos of the Lakers organization, right?
Yeah.
Whether they were at the top of the league or this last stretch before LeBron came and they were a middling to really poor team, that you could always count on some drama.
Well, it was Darius. I think it was a promoted part of the experience. It was part of the Hollywood thing. It was the flash of it all. Like, the Lakers are not supposed to be boring even when they're good, and
it was a feature, not a glitch, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean,
until it started becoming more glitch.
I think it's something that Dr. Buss wanted in the way that this team was presented. Maybe not. You know, you don't necessarily want your star player threatening to be traded to Pluto and all these other things. And you know, but when Shaq runs down the side of the court and yells, "Pay me," and that's like the extreme version of stuff that I think Dr. Buss liked about, you know, owning the Lakers and having superstars and all that. Like you say, it's a feature, not a bug. They were kind of legitimately boring last year from a team dynamic standpoint. They weren't even just boring. They were like genuinely lovable.
Yeah, I was going to say they were actually really enjoyable to be around. They were among the more enjoyable teams I've ever covered. Like, you know, not just in the NBA, but period. Like, they were really fun to watch, the camaraderie between each other, the way they genuinely played for each other, you know, and really seemed to really enjoy seeing everybody else succeed. And, you know, like people having those type of moments, you know, they get excited for, you know, the third string guys that, you know, have some good run, things like that. Like, and it was all legit. It was real. Like, you know, I all I've ever heard from some of these guys is just, this is among, if not the most close team I've ever been a part of. So, I mean, that's really enjoyable, but it's not drama as traditionally defined by the Lakers.
All of the drama was put on them, just like you were saying earlier, right? That it was the circumstances in China, and then it was the tragedy around Kobe, and then it was COVID shutting down the league, and then the restart, and then it was, I think, the most drama that this team faced as a basketball team were sort of the doubts that they,
probably Avery Bradley not going to the bubble.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the team?
And then their bubble performance, which was sort of like
not great to begin with.
Well, they tanked the bubble, right? They won. They won their first game. They got first. They clinched the number 1 seed, and then they no longer cared. It was pretty obvious that they basically said our number 1 goal at this point now is to stay healthy, is to keep our cardio up, right? Is to like remain in game shape, and then to hit the ground running when they got to the playoffs. And basically they did, right? Like they lost game 1 against Portland. This team lost 4 games during
that's
whatever.
That goes back to what I was saying before, Darius. It's like there was a gap, and you pointed it out. There's a gap already between the Lakers and the rest of the league. And we saw that based on how they ran away with a good Western Conference. They won it by a very comfortable margin, and they lost 4 games. Like they didn't lose in the playoffs. And maybe they played the wrong teams, but they didn't lose a lot of games. So there's a gap there already. And then again, it's a very plausible scenario in which Anthony Davis, even if he doesn't win MVP or whatever, is being argued about as the best player in the NBA alongside LeBron James, who is already argued as the best player in the NBA. And if you have 2 of those guys, that's sort of the end of the game. With the Clippers, though, there's I don't think there's a team in the NBA under more pressure. Even with Brooklyn's got a lot of it, and there are teams all over that have
Milwaukee's got a ton.
Milwaukee's got a ton. If things go wrong with the Clippers this year, we all know what the scenario is. Both guys leave. They have no draft picks and so on. Does this help them or hurt them? I mean, obviously it's an unanswerable question, but based on kind of what you know about Ty and what you see about Paul George and Kawhi and the makeup of the guys on that team, is this something that can help them, or is it going to be problematic?
Are you talking about the pressure
factor that is on the Clippers? Because it can be something that focuses you and galvanizes you and pushes you forward, or it can be something that turns you into the Houston Rockets.
Pressure can make diamonds, right?
That's right.
The question is whether these guys are actually that sort of rock or a different kind, right?
Zirconium?
Because whether they're built for the moment that this is going to challenge them with. I think Kawhi Leonard is. I think Paul George has had his moments in the playoffs, but they came earlier in his career. And, he went, like, I don't want to come off as some Paul George defender, but he went toe-to-toe with LeBron in the Eastern Conference when Frank Vogel was his head coach, and he looked poised to compete at that level. Now, this last stretch of playoff opportunities that he's had, they have not gone that way, but Paul George has it in him. Whether or not he's able to summon that in the big moments now remains to be seen. The thing that I would argue for the Clippers that is going to be more problematic for the Clippers than the pressure that they're facing is just whether or not their roster at this point is balanced and good enough, right? So they have Kawhi, excellent player. They have Paul George, who is a step below Kawhi, but still an excellent player. And then where else is the top-end talent? Where else is the top-end two-way talent? Are their role players going to buy in? Do they have enough ball handling and shot creation and leadership? Do they have enough athleticism in their front court? These are questions that the Lakers specifically are going to test them with, and other teams are going to test them with as well. And I think that they're probably still a move or two away from being the best version of the team that they can be around Kawhi and Paul George. And whether or not they're able to execute those moves remains to be seen in a league that maybe won't be anxious to help them in the same way that teams aren't anxious to help the Lakers, for example.
Andy, I mean, I would say, you kind of chime in on the pressure question, but the one thing I will say from a personnel standpoint, they are in a better, the two-way player thing is a problem, but I do think with Ibaka back there instead of Harrell, it might make it a little easier for them to play Lou late in games. That could help them without getting torched. Sort of thinking aloud.
Maybe Lou's going to get picked on, especially.
Oh, he'll still get picked on, but then instead of two guys, you have one. And so, like, the idea that you could play, Harrell can't play, and you can't play Lou, like, can't play either one of them. Maybe you could play one of them. I don't know. But the combination.
Well, I mean, look, Ibaka having at least some ability to score, if nothing else, could make it so you could split the difference and play Beverly with Ibaka without losing as much offense. Maybe. I mean, maybe that sort of ends up the way you kind of try to compromise wanting the scoring from Lou, but just knowing that he's just going to get targeted and sometimes eaten alive. So maybe that's the way you try to compromise it. It'll be interesting to see what Ty Lue does.
Yeah.
What I think is going to be most interesting for the Clippers, because, Brian posed that question of how everything went sideways in the bubble. What does that do for this team? Is it something that galvanizes them? Is it something that just torpedoes them and sinks them even further? I feel like the question is really just all of these guys, how much are they willing to go outside their comfort zone? And how much are they willing to accept something that doesn't necessarily make them as comfortable or happy, but they know is best for the greater good? And for guys like Patrick Beverly and Lou Williams, maybe Ivica Zubac, just because he had been there for sort of, that little engine that could identity that they built up, like accepting the idea that Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, way better than us. And the only way we're ever going to be more than, plucky 7 or 8 seeds is by having these guys there. And to some degree, stature-wise, we are going to be taking a backseat to these guys because they're stars and we're not. Even Lou Williams is a perennial 6th man of the year. He is not a star the way those guys are. He is not as good as those guys are. And then Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, are you able to go outside of your comfort zone in terms of what's needed from you as leaders?
Yeah.
Can you do certain things that you're not accustomed to, that maybe doesn't come naturally to you? Because obviously there was a leadership vacuum with this team. I mean, it had been reported all year by, Jovan Buha, among other people, doing a really good job with it. And you could see that absence in the bubble. Things fell apart really dramatically. And, Ty Lue, I think, is good at this sort of stuff, but it can't just be him. And we know this because the Clippers tried that with Doc Rivers last year, and it didn't work. Like, all of these guys have to be willing to step outside the things that they enjoy the most or the things that they identify with the most for this to work. If they do that, this team could be really good.
Can I ask you guys a question then? Do you think that leadership is one of those things that you can summon out of nowhere, or that you can call on as something that's out of your comfort zone, right? It's one thing to adjust to a role, right? And say, all right, my role is going to change.
It depends. Guys can get better.
What you need. It depends on what you need. Just because leadership comes in different forms. Like, the leadership of, Lamar Odom was sort of the spiritual leader of those teams. Kobe Bryant was the leader. It was his team, but Lamar, had a role there. Derek Fisher had a leadership role there. I mean, go back to last year's team. There were people who led in different ways for different things. It's very obviously the tone and all these things were set by LeBron.
There's a togetherness.
I understand what you're getting at, and I don't know who fills that role there.
Kobe spoke about this like later on in his career about the things that he learned in between winning the first championship or winning with Shaq and the things he needed to learn about leadership when it came to the 2008, 2009, and 2010 run where they went to 3 finals and won back-to-back titles. And the thing he talked about was embracing guys more, and that he knew that he wasn't going to change completely from the hard-nosed, get in your face, demanding sort of like high standard personality that was basically the crux of who he was as a person, right? There's no way to change that part, but he did need to incorporate a softer side at times and could not leave all of that to the Lamar Odoms and Derek Fishers and everyone else. That if he was going to be the main guy in the middle of it all, that he had to show facets of all of that, right? And the part I wonder about when it comes to a Kawhi and a Paul George, who are great leaders by example, in my opinion. They work hard, they play hard, they're excellent players on the court, they are productive, they do all of the things that you would want them to do from a basketball player standpoint. But one of the things I always talk about is that every business is a people business, right? And that you need to be able to connect with people outside of what your skill sets are and on a personality level in order to bring them in and get everyone going in the same direction. And that's one of the things that LeBron is great at, right, as a leader. And I'm wondering if that part does not come naturally to you, how do you actually summon that part?
Look, we covered Kobe in the second half of his career. We were there for all of it. He evolved. I mean, even just in the period that, because our first season with him was the first year that Phil came back. So, there was stuff during the Kobe and Shaq years that Brian and I were occasionally around for just because we did some stringer work for ESPN, the magazine, but we weren't there on a regular basis. It's just been well documented enough that what a lot of it was. But just in that period, we saw Kobe become a better leader without completely, I think, ultimately losing, the essence of who he was. Right. And Kobe was only going to be so much of a pat you on the ass leader. I mean, that's just not who he is by nature.
But he adjusted.
He got better at understanding his teammates and what they needed from him. And, I think that required going outside a comfort zone. I think the difference, though, is that, Kobe already had so much agency within the organization.
Yeah.
But also, too, and I think this really helped, guys like Lamar and, Fish, Bynum, Luke, Sasha, these are guys that have been with Kobe for a while.
Yeah.
And, after a while, I think they started getting used to a lot of what came with Kobe and, realizing that, when he would motherfuck you, the sun was going to come up the next day. Like it was going to be okay. And, like Fisher used to talk about all the time how this was Kobe's closest teammate. Like you have to protect your space with Kobe. And there are times when, he claps for the ball and you just have to say no. Like you're not getting the damn ball. And he is going to, again, MF you up and down. And you just have to be able to deal with it. But at the same time, you learn that Kobe didn't want pushover teammates anyway. As much as he wanted you to give him the damn ball every single time, he also would respect guys that wouldn't do it. Like, you needed to do something good with it. You weren't going to give it to Kobe. Like you needed to make sure that there was a purpose behind denying it. But ultimately, he'd respect you more. And, the point being, he learned to go outside his comfort zone on some levels. And I think, Kawhi is going to have to on some level. I mean, he's not going to become a rah-rah speech guy. I mean, he says 6 words the entire season. But he's going to have to do something. Paul George is going to have to do something. Like they're going to have to create some type of connection with these guys.
Yeah. The thing that I'll always point back to Kobe too is he was in his own way naturally charismatic, and that draws people in regardless. Right.
Yes.
And so he had something that people gravitated to and looked up to in a lot of ways. And that is already a step in the right direction in terms of getting people on your side and sort of building community. I'll be very interested to see how this plays out with the Clippers this year. I think on a lot of levels, a player like Montrezl Harrell was scapegoated, from his performance to the bubble to some of the early articles that came out last season about him being maybe more honest than he should have been potentially in Well, in the locker room about the team dynamics and that rubbing maybe Doc Rivers the wrong way or players behind the scenes the wrong way. And the locker room is tricky that way, and navigating that can be hard, right? But again, that's where you need leaders to sort of step in and circle the wagons and close that stuff down to make sure that everyone gets back on the same page. Thankfully, like we've been talking about this pod, like these are no longer Lakers issues, seemingly, right? No. And they belong to other teams, and that's one of the joys.
Yeah, the state that the state that the Lakers are in right now, where both of those guys are locked up.
Yeah,
or happily locked up, by their own choice. Like there was no, back against the wall, some sort of weird leverage play. Like LeBron was like, hey, let's tack on another year. Why not?
They knew what they were signing.
Yes, and wanted to. And you can break down the reasons as to why and all that, but it just shows the place that the organization is in right now relative to where it was 2 years ago is pretty stunning. And it also speaks to the challenge, I think, that faces the rest of the league, because there's always that hope when you talk about great Lakers teams that something will combust from the inside and help us catch up if there's a gap. And that doesn't seem to be something that's going to happen. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about the hard stuff. Speaking of combustion.
Yes.
That situation is fascinating, in part because of what it does to the Rockets, in part because of the ideas of the mechanics of trading James Harden, in the conversation that it's raised about player empowerment. And I know, Andy, that was something that you wanted to get into, just this idea of empowerment and responsibility and some stuff that you guys were actually, Darius, talking about on the pod the other day.
Yeah, you guys had a really good conversation about this, you and Pete and the, I guess, not very hazed Mike Trudell. And just what was
spent a lot of time talking about James Harden, which is a form of hazing to Mike Trudell.
That is true, actually. In some ways, just making Mike be a part of the conversation, that is the hazing. But like, James Harden has been, I mean, there's no way around it, holding his organization hostage.
Yeah.
And he is doing this in the most, like, not just middle finger way, but like on a lot of levels, irresponsible. Like, it's irresponsible to his teammates. It's irresponsible. Like, globally speaking, we're in the middle of a damn pandemic, and he is going out of his way to party indoors without masks. A lot of people, like, he's got to pass 6, I guess, consecutive days of COVID testing in order to start practicing. Like, I'm fully expecting him
more just for the strip club factor.
I'm expecting on day 5 for him to go to a club, like after he gets 5 straight negatives, just to make sure he has to start this whole thing over again. And like, this is like, the player empowerment movement, on steroids, what we're seeing right now. And I'm a big believer in, the player empowerment movement, and that these guys have earned the right to have this sort of leverage, and that for a while that balance of power was really out of whack. And I have no issue with these guys trying to wrestle it back towards something a little more equitable. I have no issue with guys moving around. I have no issue with guys demanding trades, that sort of thing. But I do wonder, though, if we're reaching this place now, and we've seen elements of this over the last couple of years that have kind of manifested itself with James Harden, if we're reaching this place now where the player empowerment movement includes no accountability for the players and no responsibility for the players in terms of the power that they actually have, where it's like power that feels essentially unchecked. And that's a dangerous thing, like in any scenario, not just the league. I mean, we've lived through 4 years of what it looks like when someone in great power doesn't seem that interested in the accountability part of it. Like, it's bad. And like, you look at Kyrie Irving, with this, I don't know, whatever the hell it is, media thing in Brooklyn. But like, that's actually part of his responsibilities as a franchise face. And like, I don't give a shit if he's shining the media because I'm in media. I don't care. Like, most scrum stuff is kind of stupid. But like, you're leaving your teammates out there to deal with your bullshit. Like, that's ultimately what you're doing. Or like the reports that have come out with, Kawhi and Paul George, like seeming really disconnected to the teammates in a franchise that not only they forced their way to, but like that franchise moved heaven and earth to get them in there. And there's a difference between having power that you've accumulated around the league, and in the case of all the guys that I mentioned, they've earned it, versus having agency within your own franchise. And I just wonder if that part of it is starting to get lost, especially in an age where guys may move around a lot and may not even feel the need to do that because they're almost like renting themselves out to these franchises.
I think these are all great points. And it's tricky so I'm with you. You heard me talk about this on the pod the other day. I think there's a right and a wrong. So I think there's a right and a wrong way to sort of flex your muscles in order to get to the end game that you seek. And there is a tried and true path in order to get the thing that you want accomplished. And there's a phrase I like to use about players who sort of don't quite understand what their role is on a team. Like you're not a scorer, you're a screener and a rebounder, but there you are jacking up 20 footers. And I like to say that players like that like to color outside the lines. And Harden
expanding my game, as the poet Andrew Bynum once said.
Yeah, yes, and Harden is definitely coloring outside the lines at this point when it comes to the approach that he's taking in order to get himself out of a situation that he no longer desires. I heard Ramona Shelburne say this on, I think it was The Jump, but she basically, but this was a thought I was thinking as well, that you know, just the phrase of "help me, help you," and so report to camp on time, right? Do all the things that you're supposed to do responsibly, excuse me, not just because of the pandemic and all of that stuff, which is like player health and league safety and team safety. All of that stuff is a given.
It's a bigger middle finger to like the people who have been following and all these other things. So you're going to be out for 6 more days. And but it is somewhat separate. Yeah.
But come to camp on time, take care of your obligations, and show up and continue to make your point in the exact ways that are available to you every single day as a professional basketball player. I remember seeing footage of this. I was not old enough, and I've read accounts of this. I remember when Magic Johnson came right out of a basketball game and was in the locker room and was basically just like, I think I want to be traded. Like, I really can't do this anymore. The style of play, yada, yada, yada. And it's either me or something else has to change. And then guess what? Shortly after that, the head coach got fired and Pat Riley was inserted as Lakers head coach. And historically, there is a power that superstar franchise players can wield. And there is a way in order to get your goal accomplished. And Harden, I feel like, is just not doing it in a way that is helping anyone, especially himself.
I was going to say too, and with Harden, because I've been thinking about this issue with accountability for probably like a week or so ago. Like Jovan Buha's piece about all the discord in the Clippers really got me thinking about that difference between having power as a superstar around the league versus having earned agency and currency within your own organization, because it's not the same thing. But when you look at James Harden in particular, it's like, again, I cannot stress this enough. I have no problem with him wanting a trade out of Houston. I have no problem with him, in theory, exercising the leverage that he's accumulated through his talent, through that power, because he is one of the most talented players in the league.
Top 8 player in the league, top 7 worst.
Right. At the same time, though, and again, this is what I talk about, at least in part with accountability, you're talking about a guy whose franchise has redone its roster 2 or 3 times, like in the last 6 years, bringing in new A-lister after new A-lister, all at James Harden's request. By all accounts, this is stuff James Harden was, not just signing off on, saying, go do this. Go get Dwight Howard. Go get Chris Paul. Go get Russell Westbrook. And it never works out. And you have to at least, I think as a responsible superstar, be aware of that. Like, okay, this isn't working. I want out. My owner seems like he's, at best, kind of an ass. At worst, he might be kind of broke. I mean, whatever. There's a lot of reasons he could want out, and that's fine. Yeah. But he seems completely oblivious to the idea of, you know what? This mess is in part because of them catering to me. They really have been catering to me on all these accounts, which doesn't mean I owe them a damn thing, because he doesn't. But at least have some sort of accountability for how you go about doing this, because you're not a blameless party here.
That's exactly right. So by no means, so even when you account for the ownership change that's happened and the owner clearly not being up to the same level that the previous owner was, and you look at now the general manager has left the team, and the head coach that he won an MVP under has left the team. If there was that much instability in any organization, it would not be out of hand. No one would blink twice at any star player who was on a team where those specific things happened, that guy wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Right. But this is how bad Harden is handling the situation, is that even with all of those things working in his favor, he's still not a sympathetic figure in this situation, because he's handling this so poorly. And that speaks volumes for just the unprofessionalism and the lack of accountability that you're talking about in terms of his role in getting the team to where it is right now.
I think, though, there's so much of this that's specific to him, too, because he is ask Mike, he's a really polarizing player. I mean, he is somebody who's put in that category of, one of the 5, 6 best, I think he is, in the NBA. He's just a transcendent scorer, but plays in a style that really pisses people off. It just drives people insane. I like it. I think James Harden's ability to draw fouls is like an artistic skill that I appreciate as part of the game. I also get why it drives people insane. I feel like this situation, to some degree, even with the strip clubs and the COVID irresponsibility, would be different with a player that people thought of differently, that didn't have the playoff flameouts or whatever it might be, and just played in a way that people didn't get so angry about. Some of this just feels James Harden specific to me in ways that I think add interesting layers to the story.
No, the perception of him definitely, the perception of him as a player seeps into all of this, right? And just how much he's liked, but welcome to the world that we live in, right? Like anyone, if you're beloved, then your transgressions are often overlooked or minimized. And if you're polarizing or disliked, then your transgressions are amplified. And that's how this goes, especially in 2020. I don't necessarily think that's fair, but that's what it is, right?
The part that I also, and I'm curious what you guys think, like the whether basketball Twitter, generally speaking, is very supportive of players and player empowerment and the balance of power. Listening, basketball media, basketball Twitter, are normal us people who watch the game, follow it, whatever. Are they as sympathetic? Because I don't get the impression that they are.
I think they're more sympathetic than they used to be. It seems like, I don't know. That's an interesting question, because the fans that I know we interact with through Twitter or, sometimes, taking calls on air, stuff like that, it doesn't seem as resentful towards it as say it was like maybe, when the big three formed in Miami with the Heatles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just because I think it was so shocking. I actually think though, if it puts off at least some fans now, it's not even so much the idea of them having this type of power, or maybe even like having, the type of player movement. Although I think the amount of player movement sometimes just, you lose certain aesthetics, like the idea of a guy, if not playing his entire career with one franchise, spending a good 7-10 years there, like you lose certain attachment points.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, I think when guys come in and they look sort of like mercenaries, and especially like really, really well compensated mercenaries, and don't seem to give back that way. And I mean, I don't know if they are obligated to or not, like in terms of, I guess, really being connected to your team. I guess if you win a championship, in the end, it doesn't really matter. Kawhi Leonard was the ultimate mercenary with Toronto.
It's a bit. I think everybody understands it's a business, but everybody's goals in the business are different. I treat you as, as a fan, I treat you, player, as the part of the business to me, Darius, which is go win me a championship and entertain me and make me happy and give me distraction in my life or whatever. That's the part of it. That's the business part that I'm concerned about as a fan, and I want people to provide me that, and why I feel betrayed when they don't. So I mean, everybody sort of treats it as a business, but everybody looks at the business differently.
I mean, were I to guess, based, again, this is largely just anecdotal in terms of just the interaction I've had with fans, I get a sense that the average fan has been less put off by the amount of power these guys have had than, say, some of them offering political opinions or getting involved in social issues and stuff like that, which, I mean, I don't think that fans should get upset about that either, but be that as it may, I think in a lot of ways, it just comes down to what are you doing? What are you doing with that power? And do you seem invested in your team? Like, do you actually just seem invested in ways that is about more than just playing hard? You know what I mean? Like LeBron, his first season with the Lakers was openly disconnected to the Lakers. And I know we heard from a lot of fans who didn't like it. And it didn't matter that LeBron played really well. Like, on balance, LeBron played extremely well, no matter how invested he was emotionally with that team or not. You could feel it. I mean, like, it's part of the reason why his leadership this season was so incredible, is because it was a night and day contrast to what you saw in the first year.
Andy, this season is over. We have to start referring to it as last season.
But you know what I'm saying, though.
I know. Well, but I'm just saying, it's the passage of time.
I know.
I was listening. To be fair, I was listening to the JJ Redick podcast today, and he had on Chris Paul, which was a great episode. So if you get a chance,
I've heard it's great.
And JJ Redick himself said that this season just feels like a continuation from last season. It feels like just one long season. He's like, I came here a year ago.
They had more time in between the end of the suspension of play and the end of the bubble than they did between the end of the bubble and the beginning of the season. So I mean,
By the way, JJ Redick, man, knock it off with the podcast and like being really good at this shit. Like enough.
Save some for us.
Exactly. Enough.
Save some for us.
It's like every time Kareem writes an article, I'm like, God damn it, man. Like, it's embarrassing that I've ever gotten paid to write anything. Like, just stop. Like,
you have 6 MVP awards and 6 championships. You don't need.
You're a documentarian. Like, you're a historian. Like,
you want to kick
like
what this is?
He was on the Veronica Mars staff. Like, I'm not even kidding. He was on the writing staff for Veronica Mars.
Yes, the specificity of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is like stunning. Like scientists should be drawing his DNA to preserve it and like inject it in other things, because think of all this stuff. It's not that he's just there are a lot of people who are really good athletes who are really smart. Not all of them are 7 feet tall with that kind of grace and to have the intellect and then the variety of it's like, why like that shouldn't be able to happen.
Was also great in Airplane.
Yes.
Excellent
comedic timing.
Fought Bruce Lee. Come on, man.
Seriously, enough. It's gauche at this point.
Really
like it's not fair to the rest of us.
It's not.
Like seriously, like every time because he writes on like such a wide scope of issues, and it's always incredible. And I'm like, dude, just stop.
Like here's a movie review.
Yes, like he's better. He's like as good as Kenneth Turan or something. I'm like, stop it, man. Like,
I should say too, it was actually Kareem who made that ramen.
As Sean Highkin puts that, Kareem was on with Mark Maron a few years ago. They talked only about jazz. I think Andy, that would have been when he was promoting his jazz book.
Yes.
Again, go after yourself.
I interviewed.
What are you doing with your jazz book? 6-time MVP Kareem.
I interviewed Kareem. God, I can't remember if it was the beginning of 2020 or part of 2019, because as we talked about, time is just a blur. But it was about a documentary that he made about Black soldiers in the Revolutionary War for History, the channel. And it's great. Okay. Like, it's an incredible documentary. I'm just like, okay, kudos. Stop. Just like, stop it.
Where does he focus? Like, we talk a lot about, Kareem does get bypassed too often and too easily in the GOAT conversation for the NBA. I think if you expand it out to just greatest basketball career of all time, then Kareem, I think, starts to get there. However, like, we gloss over Kareem in the NBA conversation too much. But this is a good question from A1BY. Where does Kareem fall in just like the GOAT ranking for all-time impressive human beings? Because like, who competes with that package? Jazz documentaries, jazz books, Revolutionary War projects.
Sounds ridiculous.
No, it does. It's not, and you know what? Not even a 6-time MVP. He invented the skyhook.
He was a civil rights. He was a civil rights activist.
Yes.
I mean, like,
this is when you think about
that movie, but
might be on the Mount Rushmore, to use the stupid sports cliche, of just humans that have ever walked the earth.
Like, honestly, like, just going through all this, and I mean, I knew it a little bit anyway, but my God, I just wasted my life.
I never thought about it.
Like, I really just wasted my entire existence. Like, Kareem accomplished more, like, in the year, I don't know, like 1974 than I'll ever do over like
a random year.
Yeah, I don't even know what he did in 74. I'm just assuming it. Like, it's a fair guess.
It is true, though. I mean, if you'd asked me, I could tell you were wasting your life. That part.
I'm just saying.
Except for 10 to 11 on weeknights.
Yeah, well, until Kareem has his own live stream show and blows this one out of the water.
That's like he's scrolling across Twitter right now and saying, "Oh, that's a good idea." And tomorrow we're out of business.
Yeah, pretty much. Hopefully he'll at least just have us on, like, as a way of saying goodbye. Like, it's amazing. And he's a great, like, for somebody that used to hate doing media and, like, didn't really enjoy interacting with reporters. Oh my God, he's an incredible interview. Kareem's Twitch channel. Kareem's TikTok.
He'd probably be, and he could probably pick up Call of Duty or something if he wanted to combine like the normal video game Twitch stuff. Oh,
I know. I've
never thought of it in that context of it's like the package that he's bringing to that debate. It's going to compete with anybody.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable.
Better not show up with a knife to that gunfight.
No.
All right. Darius, is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I mean, I love talking with you guys. I love talking about the NBA and the Lakers. You had asked me earlier about teams from the West. We did this last time too. What are your thoughts on any of the teams from the East? Like,
okay,
which teams intrigue you the most? Brooklyn.
I'm glad you mentioned, because I skipped the part, and as long as you're willing to stay,
let's do it.
We skipped the part about Western Conference teams, and we'll talk about that, because there is not a team from I actually don't love the Clippers. I'm fascinated by the Clippers, but in terms of like pure basketball enjoyment, it's really every team behind them that I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
I want to watch Denver. I want to watch
Portland.
Portland.
Phoenix.
I want to Phoenix. Whoa, that's going to be fun. I think Utah is going to be a lot of fun this year. I like, nobody talks about them. Dallas is going to be tremendous fun if Porzingis is healthy.
New Orleans.
The East,
New Orleans,
for sure.
Very interesting.
So it's going to be, none of them are as good as the Lakers, but it's super fun. In the East, there are a lot of good teams. I'm intrigued by how Milwaukee has to respond to this stuff, and like, are they better off with not being able to finish what they did with the Bogdanovich thing and screwing that thing up in ways that just still seem very odd, and somebody's going to write a movie about? Maybe not a movie. That's probably too much.
30 for 30. We'll give them
write a story, a really good article.
Yeah, maybe a 15 for 15. I don't even know, 30 for 30.
Documentary short.
I'll tell you one I want to see.
Brooklyn feels like they should be more interesting to me than I think they are. Like I feel like I'm supposed to believe that this team is going to dominate in the East and like rise up to the top, and they've got these stars. But we had Nikias Duncan on from Basketball News, and he broke it down on our podcast, and he broke it down made a very convincing argument why that team may not work. And I think that the possibility for drama there is cool, but from a basketball standpoint, I find them less interesting than Miami.
Yeah, the team that I'm actually really interested in is Philly.
Thank you. I forgot about them.
Because they have the shooting now, bring in Seth Curry, bringing in Danny Green. You've got somebody in Dwight that, obviously isn't the shooting, but he's somebody that can, help ease that load off Joel Embiid and hopefully bring the freshest version of him throughout an entire season. If it doesn't work this year in Philly, then you really start wondering, okay, what's going on with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons that they've seemingly regressed as a duo? Because like they were better 3 years ago than they were now. And a lot of that seemed like on the surface, there was so much roster imbalance and so little shooting. But now that you've got, Seth Curry, Danny Green, Tobias Harris, I think in a better role this year than what was there last year. If it's not working, what do you do then? Because at that point, I think with a new coach and Doc Rivers, like it clearly just isn't working.
I think they trade for James Harden, but that takes a different discussion, right? Okay. The Philly intrigues me because they make sense now. They make much more sense than last year's team, and they're much closer to the version of the team that they were right before the Jimmy Butler trade.
Yeah,
which was a really good team. Jimmy got them a lot closer to being a great team. And if he would have stayed, then maybe they would have been a team last year who was where Miami was. Instead, Jimmy was in Miami, and that team made real noise. I'm a big Ben Simmons fan, and I just think that he's a wonderful talent, a two-way player. And Embiid is in a league that is going away from players like him. He is still the one guy who reminds you of why players like him were in vogue in the first place. Yeah. And that just, those two guys alone intrigue me. But when you surround them with better shooting, it starts to make a lot more sense.
One of the things, again, that was just an extraordinary long answer I gave before to forget ultimately the team that I was thinking about. Philly's really the only team in the East, maybe the only team in basketball, where the gap between what they sort of are based on where they finished last year and what they could be if things line up with this sort of revamped lineup and all these other things is massive. Where they go from kind of middle of the pack Eastern Conference team that maybe make a finals if everything goes to like, holy shit, like that's enough talent to win things. That's what makes, and then you add to that, one of those guys is Joel Embiid, who is, from a personality standpoint, from a style standpoint, from a, like, do you need to be getting in better shape kind of stuff? Like, there's all these little things with him, but the talent is incredible. And then Ben Simmons, which is like another one of these guys where you're almost trying to rewrite what you have to be a dominant championship caliber NBA player. He doesn't shoot jump shots. Like, can you have your second best player, your 1A, whatever it is, because he's so good defensively? Can you have a guy who?
Look, that's the big question with Milwaukee, and Ben Simmons isn't as good as Giannis, and that's the question that plagues Milwaukee right now in terms of their best player.
Whether Giannis can make a jumper?
No,
Giannis takes jumpers like Larry Bird.
But that's my point, though. But that's my point. Is that if it can't work with Giannis, with the type of jumper that he has, then you decide that it ultimately can't work with Ben Simmons at all.
If you put the right personnel around it, because like Darius, the question of can you win with this player as your best player? Can you win with this player as your second best player? Is can you win with this guy as your quarterback? Whatever it might be is yes is always the answer. If or as Darius Soriano might say, yes and no.
Sure.
If if your quarterback isn't as good, well, maybe you need a better offensive line. Maybe you need a little more better wide receivers, whatever it is. Ben Simmons is incredibly good at certain things, but you do have to kind of build the rest of the roster a little bit to compensate, and that makes them interesting.
They took steps in that direction this offseason, which is why they intrigue me. I'm not going to. So I didn't hear what Nekias said about the Nets.
Basically, he doesn't buy the defense.
I don't.
Positional roster holes. Like they're very heavy in certain places and very light in others.
Yeah, we talked about that on the LFR pod, and that was the point that Pete made about the overlap in skills and basically the general roster imbalance that they have. And I was talking about their lack of defense and whether or not they're going to be able to get the stops that they need. There's also a weird hierarchy there with DeAndre Jordan and whether or not that carries over to this season and Steve Nash's first year. I'm a big Steve Nash fan, and I think that he was a fantastic player and a great communicator. And you can tell when you listen to him talk that he's just super thoughtful. And I think those are traits that you really need as a head coach, like a good communicator. Those were things that I did not know Frank Vogel possessed in the way that he proved he did last season.
I didn't know either.
That were very beneficial to the Lakers' success. And so I have high hopes for Nash, but it's a tricky situation up there. The only other thing I wanted to ask you about the East was how big of a deal will it be this season if Giannis actually does not sign this extension?
Oh God, it's just going to be hanging over everything. I mean, it will be talked about non-stop. I mean, it will never. We saw what happened with Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little bit different because after a while,
it's very clear he wanted to leave.
Right, we knew that he wanted to leave, and although I will say this, a lot of people have said that all things being equal, in a perfect world, AD would have liked to stay in New Orleans if there was a way to actually win there. He wasn't opposed to it on just the issue of market size, like something like that. Like if New Orleans could have put a winner around him, he was at least open towards staying.
I think that's the Giannis feel.
Right. I mean, by everything I have ever heard, Giannis would like to be convinced to stay in Milwaukee. Like he doesn't have a burning desire to leave because he wants to be in New York or LA or Chicago or somewhere like that. Like he's more than happy being in the market that is Milwaukee. He just wants to be convinced that he can actually win. And this will be hanging over everything.
So let me ask both of you.
Sure.
If you were in his shoes, knowing that this same contract is available next season, and considering the distraction that is already clear this is going to be. His teammates are getting asked about this every day of training camp. He got asked about it today.
I mean, dude,
so it's not going away.
Guys in Brooklyn get asked about Harden.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's going to be asked about this.
Are you asking me, were I Giannis, or me, were I me pretending to be honest? Because this to me is one of the great things that really does separate who these guys are versus who we are. Because how much are we talking here? It's like
It's like $250 million or it's some crazy.
Like if somebody had a piece of paper that I could sign and I would get $250 million, I would literally stop moving. Like if I'm walking down the street, I move away from the street and I lean up against a building. I don't move until somebody delivers me a copy of that paper so I can sign it, because I could get hit by a bus. I mean, anything could happen.
Yeah.
These guys can, like, Giannis can legitimately be like, maybe not. Because if he tears an ACL this year, he's still going to get the same contract next year.
He's getting that same money next year, which is why it's an interesting dilemma, though, right? Because as a guy who is obviously team first, and I think everything that you guys were saying about him being comfortable in Milwaukee and perfectly happy to stay, and I think preferably from his perspective would stay, right? Mm-hmm. The downside is more the uncomfortableness of what this hanging over everything is. And so it's interesting to me about whether or not he actually signs it.
It's sort of a twist on the same, this is player empowerment. This is a guy who can say, this is, it's my career. Yeah. What's best for the team? Sign the extension now, or, sign the Supermax now. What's best for me? Might not be that. So if you choose to do what's best for you, which they all should,
yes,
you do it in a way that you say, look, guys, I'm not going to send, but I'm not going to talk about it. Like, or you hold the press conference, or you answer the question. Like, that's where the part of I'm going to be as forthright as I can, or don't ask my my teammates about it because they don't know, whatever it is, where you do then sort of, I think, for the benefit of the team, to be able to win this year, which probably has something to do with your decision about whether or not you want to stay. If you want to maximize that opportunity, then, like Andy was saying, there's that sort of the how matters. But he is under zero obligation. He doesn't owe anybody a signature on that paper. Crazy as it sounds.
I mean, in some ways I'm projecting my own, worldview onto this, but I feel like if I were Giannis, unless I really doubted the front office's ability to build a legitimate contender around me, and I'd be a little bit nervous at the fact that clearly they can't tamper well, if nothing else, and that would make me nervous. You're supposed to be good at tampering if you do this stuff. You're supposed to be able to figure out the parameters of a sign and trade without it getting leaked out. One way or the other.
You'd like to come to your team.
Right. Well, you may need to, especially, I would argue too that maybe you need to be really good at tampering if you're in a small market, right? Like,
you need to be really good. You need to be really, really good. And somewhere along the line, that thing got botched, and that would make me nervous. But, he also knows this front office very well, and he knows what they're capable of. If I were happy with the situation and I were confident, I think I would sign it, just because I know ultimately I'd be able to find my way to another team. And I don't like. I like closure.
The more we talk about it, Darius, just to definitively answer your question, I don't think I would. I don't need to sign it.
It's not that I don't need to. I would want to. I would want to sign it and just have this thing done and not have to worry about it, knowing I'm in good shape either way. And if I don't like it here, I'll be able to get moved.
But your best opportunity to move, Darius, is the one that you have in front of you. And as much as you sign the max and get traded, it is not easy to trade, to land in your destination that you want to land to when you decide that you want to be traded. It is not easy necessarily to do that, no matter who you are. Like, it can be difficult. It can be hard to get the return that you want. It can be hard to get to the city that you want to go to.
This is why
you don't need to.
This is why this discussion is fascinating to me, because you guys are both taking totally reasonable positions in this.
What would you do?
And personally, I would wait. I think. And I would probably have all of the needed conversations I needed to have in order to try to grease the wheels and do the stand-up thing for everyone involved, right? Which is looking out for my own best interests while having open dialogue with the front office, while having open dialogue with my teammates, and then being as forthright and as firm as I could be with the media to try to alleviate any of the stuff that is going to be noise. That's not going to stop the noise. And
not even close.
And if that's the decision that I make, I have to be willing to continue to face those questions and those doubts and those issues that are going to come at you, and you have to be prepared for that.
You and me, we're stand-up guys. We can handle that kind of heat. Andy can't. That's just, I think, the difference here is
I just don't want to. That's the difference.
It's too much heat.
The thing is, too, is from a functional standpoint, though, what I will say as well.
I'm not a drama, I'm just not like a drama, lady of the night like you are, Brian. I mean, that's a difference. I'm not.
You can say the word.
No, I find it demeaning. I just, I'm not that person, Brian. I don't need to have everything centering around me for a year, which is ultimately the reason why I know you're doing this anyway. You love the attention. That's actually why you're doing this. Yeah. Darius is doing it for centuries.
You know what? I would have been one of those people
doing this because you just want to be the belle of the ball for a year.
I would have been one of those people back in the Middle Ages who would have put you to death for not thinking that the sun rotated around me.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why you would sign month-to-month contracts your entire career just to make sure that this never ended.
I would like to think that at the beginning of this argument that Darius was on team sign, and then he listened to both of our laying it out, and he agreed that mine was more convincing.
Well,
that is how it is playing out in my head.
It's not a big deal. It's just coincidence that Darius will never be back again. but it's one has nothing to
starting
do.
Next week.
They're not related. They're not related.
It's pure coincidence. Kamenetzky and Darius Soriano that I have. Yeah.
That's all right. I love working with Pete and Mike anyway.
No, my next partner is going to be Kareem. So, sorry guys. My show is actually going to run from 9:55 to 11:05.
And your role will be whatever Kareem asks. Whatever Kareem says it is.
God,
that will be your role.
We try to have a variety of people on this show. The amount of prep that you'd have to be able to do to be able to just keep up with the people Kareem would be able to get.
Oh, I'm not going to lie. The interview I did with him about that documentary, was intimidating. It was very intimidating, in part because I was like, "Oh my God, there's so little about the subject I actually knew." Like it really was.
Whoa! There was a Revolutionary War.
I'm not gonna lie,
man.
Let me take some notes.
Revolution for who?
The fear of asking Kareem a really stupid question lingers over you a lot in a long form interview with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That hangs over you quite a bit.
Basketball, eh?
Yeah.
How'd that go for you? Yeah. GOAT. This is something we need to explore. The all-time GOAT human being, impressive human being list. That is something maybe we don't get into it with Bernardo Ruiz only because we hadn't thought about it. We had a conversation with Bernardo Ruiz, the documentarian. The new 30 for 30 is coming out next week. He directed it. It's called The Infinite Race. We're going to play our interview that we did with him tomorrow night. We'll also talk a little football. This is me rapping, by the way. I'll be honest with you. I'm tired. Just taking control of this thing. But so we'll have our interview with Bernardo Ruiz. It is a fascinating 30 for 30. Check it out. The trailers and stuff.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
And we'll talk Rams Patriots Thursday Night Football. Andy and I are playing each other this weekend in the fantasy playoffs. That will probably come up.
Yes, it
will. Has been lurking on the chat, probably wondering what he's getting into.
Yeah, Sean Hyken's going to be with us Friday. We're very excited.
And Darius Soriano, thank you so much. Forum Blue and Gold is where you read his stuff, and the Laker Film Room podcast is where you listen to him talk. And we always appreciate the time.
Appreciate the time, man. Especially you sticking around for a while, man. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And I don't think it would be any other way that we go long on a day where I am here.
No, it's true. You know what? Harrison Fagan predicted it. So there you go.
Harrison.
We did get to talk, which was not what he predicted.
Sure.
We will see everyone tomorrow. Dank u, Nederland.